Welcome to the Intsink channel.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we are not looking at the charts. We're not talking about ETFs, and we're certainly not talking about the wolves of Wall Street. Today, we need to talk about an uncomfortable truth, a chapter of history that many people deliberately choose to forget. Current day Bitcoin. It trades for tens of thousands of dollars per coin. People call it digital gold. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, back in 2010, when Bitcoin was nothing more than air code without any backing, who gave it its very first price tag? Why would a string of invisible, intangible hash values be worth actual cold, hard cash? The textbooks will tell you it was about consensus. It was about the ideal of decentralization. Bullshit. Ideals don't put food on the table, and they certainly didn't make people open their wallets back then. The reality is cruel. Bitcoin's first pot of gold didn't come from geeky faith. It came from sin. The thing that gave Bitcoin its first real purchasing power wasn't coffee, and it wasn't pizza. It was narcotics, weapons, and a digital underground empire known as the Silk Road. Today, let's dig up the grave of history and look at the bloody childhood that turned a toy into a currency. Let's dial the clock back to 2010. Back then, if you wanted to buy some Bitcoin, the experience was enough to make you question your sanity. There was no Binance, no Coinbase. There weren't even any decent websites. Imagine this scenario. You are an ordinary guy living in Ohio. You hear about this Bitcoin thing and you want to buy $100 worth. You realize there is nowhere to buy it. The most absurd method at the time? You won't believe this. It was through a video game called Second Life. You had to register for the game, use PayPal to buy the game's currency, Linden dollars, and then find a shady middleman in the game's black market to swap that game money for Bitcoin. After all the fees, you were losing 10% or even 20% of your money. And that wasn't even the craziest part. There was a company called Intsink. Their process felt like a scene from a spy movie. You had to put on a hat, walk into a 7-Eleven and find a red MoneyGram phone. You'd pick up the receiver, whisper a secret code and shove cash at a confused cashier, telling them, "I need to deposit this." Then you'd go home with a wrinkled receipt, staring at your screen, praying the numbers would actually show up. If you look at this today, you'd think these people were insane. The barrier to entry was high, the user experience was terrible, and the fees were astronomical. Why would anyone force themselves to buy it? It makes no commercial sense, unless they had a desperate need, a rigid demand that was more important than the fees and more terrifying than prison. That need was, they required a form of money that no one could trace. While Bitcoin was still trying to find its purpose, in the shadows of the internet, a young man was looking for a missing puzzle piece. His name was Ross Ulbricht. Now, don't picture a scarred mob boss. Quite the opposite. He was gentle, a physics master's student in his 20s who did yoga. He was a complete idealist. Influenced heavily by the Austrian School of Economics, he wanted to conduct a social experiment. What would the world look like if we built a market with absolutely no government regulation? A totally free market. But he faced two technical problems. Number one, how do buyers and sellers remain invisible to each other? Tor, the onion router, solved this. It masked IP addresses. Number two, and this was the hardest part, how do you pay? PayPal, credit cards. The FBI would follow the bank records to your front door in minutes. Until one day, Ulbricht discovered Bitcoin. At that moment, for him, it was like finding the launch keys to a nuclear weapon. Tor hid the location, Bitcoin hid the identity, It was a match made in heaven. In early 2011, a website called Silk Road went live. The interface was clean, simple, almost like Amazon in the 90s. But the products listed would make your jaw drop. 99% pure cocaine, LSD, fake passports, hacking tools, and everything could only be paid for in Bitcoin. Here is the irony. In an underground world full of outlaws, scammers, and drug dealers, where nobody knows anybody, why would I send you coins first? How do I know you ship the goods? Logically, this should have been a paradise for scammers. But Ulbricht was a genius. He used code to build a credit system stricter than regular society. He invented an escrow system, just like Alipay or PayPal. The buyer orders, the Bitcoin is held by the platform. The seller ships. Once the buyer confirms receipt, the platform releases the coins to the seller. And to survive in this market, the drug dealer's customer service became extremely competitive. To get a 5-star review, they would vacuum seal drugs to full, police dogs, disguise packages as business letters, and even offer free replacements if a package got lost. Can you imagine? On the dark web, drug dealers had more integrity than FedEx. This was the turning point in Bitcoin's history. June 2011. A tech media outlet called Gawker published an article with a sensational headline: "The underground website where you can buy any drug imaginable." It was meant to be an expose, a negative report. Instead, it became the biggest free advertisement in the history of Silk Road and Bitcoin. Thousands of curious people, addicts, and libertarians flooded the site, and the first thing they had to do was buy Bitcoin. In just 1 week, the price of Bitcoin rocketed from a few cents to over $30. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what I call the Narcotic Standard. At its peak, Silk Road processed about 9.5 million Bitcoins. Do you know what that means? It accounted for 80% of the total global circulation of Bitcoin at the time. Meaning, in that phase, Bitcoin wasn't a store of value. It was purely an underground currency. Its value was propped up by raw, desperate demand. It didn't matter where you were from, or if you believed in Satoshi Nakamoto. If you wanted to buy from this black market, you had to use Bitcoin. That liquidity was more effective than any marketing campaign. But as the saying goes, those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad. Silk Road became too popular. It became a thorn in the side of the FBI and the DEA. The US government swore to take it down. Now, according to the movie script, this should be a top-tier hacker war. The FBI should use supercomputers, crack the encryption of the Onion network, or trace every node on the blockchain, right? Wrong. Reality is often more absurd and stupider than fiction. The man who destroyed this $1.2 billion empire wasn't a master hacker. He was a tax agent from the IRS named Gary Alford, and his weapon was simply Google search. This agent was stubborn. He told, since this site blew up in early 2011, the founder must have promoted it somewhere before that, right? So he frantically searched forum posts from early 2011. Finally, on a Bitcoin Geek forum, he found an early post promoting Silk Road. The user's ID was Altoid. Tracing this ID, he found that Altoid had made another post looking to hire programmers. At the end of that post, to receive resumes, the user left an email address, rossulbricht@gmail.com. Yes, you heard that right. Ross Ulbricht. He used his real name. In this empire of layers of encryption that had the FBI running in circles, the founder left his real Gmail on a public forum. This was the Achilles heel October 2013. A public library in San Francisco. Ross Ulbricht was sitting there, using the free Wi-Fi to manage his empire. Two FBI agents pretended to be a quarreling couple behind him to distract him. The moment he turned his head, a third agent rushed in and grabbed his laptop before he could lock the screen. The admin dashboard was wide open, caught red-handed. We all know the ending of the story. Ross Ulbricht was sentenced to a double life imprisonment plus 40 years. He will die in prison. Silk Road collapsed. At the time, experts said, it's over. Bitcoin's biggest use case is gone. This thing is going to zero. And the result? Bitcoin dipped for a moment, but then it turned around and staged a super rally, breaking $1,000 that very year. Why? Because the world suddenly realized one thing. Even the US government, with all its power, could only arrest the man. They could not shut down the network. The fall of Silk Road was like a surgical operation. It cut out the biggest legal tumor from Bitcoin, but it proved its resilience. From that day on, Bitcoin washed off the mud and blood, walked out of the dark web, and headed toward Wall Street, eventually becoming today's digital gold. This is Bitcoin's childhood. It wasn't clean. It was full of sin. It was even dirty. But it is this history that teaches us. As long as something solves a real human pain point, even if that pain point lies in the shadows, it cannot be killed. I am Intsink. We continue to observe from the corner. See you in the next one.